Because when you conquer what's happening in your body, then you are now qualified to help others. See yourself as a health coach. I do not believe that you need to go to university and become a doctor. I do not believe that even some of the courses that are available are that necessary, because many of them have components in there that are not in line with God's Word. And so the two main textbooks that we're going to use this week are the Bible and the book, The Ministry of Healing. And you may not all have a ministry of healing, but I also know that it's not hard to get. You might have an app on your phone. Yeah, and I know when I'm memorising, I really enjoy those apps on the phone if I'm travelling, because you can just go there. But the page that I want to target is page 127 of the Ministry of Healing. Now, I'd like to encourage everyone, not necessarily this week, not necessarily these 10 days, but to begin memorising the 2 paragraphs on page 127 of the Ministry of Healing, because it's in a nutshell. Now, the other thing that I also noted with Benched was the importance of physical law. And I'd like to give you a quote. It's found in page 347 of Christ Objects Lesson, where it states there that transgression of physical law is transgression of the moral law, because God is as truly the author of the physical law as he is of the moral law. He has written his law with his own finger on every nerve, every muscle, every faculty with which we have been entrusted. And every misuse of any part of our organism is a violation of that law. Now, they're strong words, aren't they? Mm-hmm. They're very strong words. Does that mean not drinking enough water is equal to the thou shalt not steal? No, I'm not going to debate over that one, but I'm just giving you the prophet's words here. Every misuse of any part of our organism is a violation of that law. All, how many? All should become intelligent as to the human frame, and how to keep it in the condition necessary to do the work of the Lord. Now, as students to a medical missionary training school, preparing to start your own medical missionary facilities, it's absolutely important that you know something about the house you live in. All should become intelligent as to the human frame, and how to keep it in the condition necessary to do the work of the Lord. And we're going to be going very deep in the anatomy and physiology, because what I want to make sure I give you this week, and if I don't, I want you to question me on it, is why. Why are these things so? Proverbs 26 verse 2 states that the curse causeless shall not come. Sir Isaac Newton, he became famous on that law. It was already written in the Bible though. To every action there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Things don't just happen. There is always a cause. And Galatians 6 verse 9 states, no, this is 6 verse 7. In Galatians 6 verse 7, the Bible says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that he shall also reap." This is basically the law of cause and effect. Isn't that true? And to every problem that happens in the body, there is always a cause. But in medicine today, someone goes to the doctor, got some aches in their hands, has a few tests, and the doctor says, "Aha, we found out the cause of all your problems. You've got arthritis." Do you know that defies basic reason? That defies basic reason. What's the cause? And if you say to the doctor, "Have I? What's the cause?" he might say, it's possibly in the genes. Can't blame a germ for that one, can you? It might be some mutation of some gene. But what I'm going to show you this week is it's actually much simpler than that. And I want to prepare you for when you start your medical mission facility that you will have answers. Because the people don't have answers out there. There is so much confusion today. There's been more confusion in the last 2 years than ever has there been. Isn't that true? Yeah. So let's go to page 127 of the Ministry of Healing. It starts with the only hope of better things is the education of people in the right principles. The things I'm going to teach you here this week, you might not share that depth, and I don't usually share this depth with our health guests. But you need to know this depth to be able to skim on the surface. You see that? When you're going to skim on the surface, you need to know what's underneath, don't you? So that's where we're going to go quite a lot this week, is underneath. We're going to go underneath and we're going to have a look at why these things are so. Let the physicians teach the people that restorative power lies not in drugs, but in nature. And this next sentence you may know, but I'd like to challenge whether you really believe it. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that arise because of a violation of the laws of health. Arthritis is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that arise because of a violation of the laws of health. COVID is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that arise because of a violation of the laws of health. Could it be that simple? It sounds simple, but as you'll see, it's a lot deeper than that. At our health retreat, we had a chemist working for us for a while. He used to tell people that he used to hurt people, now he helps them. And if anyone got sick, he'd say, "What law of health have you broken?" Because isn't disease an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that arise because of a violation of the laws of health? So I took him aside and I said, "Andrew, please don't." But he said, I said, "Wait, do you know that person might be keeping all the laws of health today, for the last year, but 10 years ago they weren't. 10 years ago they might have been drinking, smoking. 10 years ago they might have never drank or smoked, but they might never drank water. 10 years ago they might never have drunk alcohol or smoked cigarettes, and they might be drinking their waters, but they go to bed at midnight." So I said to him, "Please be cautious what you say." What's God's number one character trait? Mercy. Merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands. Do you ever wonder why he put mercy into us? And as medical missionaries, we need to be merciful. The three things that we use, and we'll be using them a lot this week, when you're called to help someone, history. I go way back. I go way back. Did you have a happy, healthy childhood? Did you have any sickness as a child? Did you? I go back. Dig right back. In fact, we need to all be private investigators. You see that? And you know, those little tiny bits, they all come together to make us who we are today. We look at history, we look at symptoms. And sometimes we've had people come to our retreat with a pile of tests this big. And I just carefully put them aside. And you know what I say? I'm interested in you. I'm interested in your childhood. I'm interested in what happened back there. It's like the lady that said, I've had asthma since I was 5. So I immediately think, what happened at 5? It's not rocket science, is it? I said, did anything happen at 5? We moved into another house. Oh, and we children love this house because in the lounge room, little mushrooms grew on the carpet. It's not rocket science, is it? The adults were probably okay, but the little children... And you know what happens when they walk on that carpet and move those mushrooms? Guess what they're breathing in? They're breathing in the mold spores. And what does God say to do to a house that has mold in it? Destroyed. Absolutely. Now I'm just touched on a couple of areas where we're going to go into in a lot more detail. So we look at history, we look at symptoms, and then we look at response. How simple is that? We look at the history. That gives us a bit of an idea. Yes, yeah. Happy, healthy childhood? No, I had tonsillitis as a child. You know what that immediately tells me? Allergy. Do you know what the tonsils are? The watchman at the gate. And if the watchman at the gate's being too noisy, do you shoot him? Because he's making so much noise up there on the wall. Do you just shoot him? Whew, what a relief. That watchman was making just too much noise. What's going to happen next? The enemy will take down your city. That's what your tonsils are. They're the watchmen at the gate. So if they're swollen, do you cut them out? What do you find out? Why are they swollen? And we'll be going into that. We're going to be looking at respiratory in detail in one of our presentations. What we're going to be doing in our practical, and I'll just warn you, in our practical, probably in about the last 3 days, you are going to make up programs for someone with tonsillitis. You're going to make up programs for people with certain diseases. So I'm just warning you now, so if you hear something that might help you next week when you're making programs, and I am of one that anything you ask me, I'm very happy to answer your questions. And if you say to me, Barbara, what was that? I will not say to you, you should be listening, because what's God's number 1 character trait? Mercy. Mercy. I have mercy on you. I will be guilty of information overload this week. And I recognise that, and that's why I'm very happy to answer your questions as you go. And if you have a question, please ask, because the question you have, others may have. I raised 8 children. There's no such thing as a wrong question or a silly question. The only question my children couldn't ask is when I asked them to they make the bed, they couldn't say why. Got that? So there was a there were, you know, anyway, that is common sense. And you know, there's been a death and no one attended the funeral because no one knew he'd died. Do you know what it was? It was the death of common sense. Am I right? Yeah. Yeah. And it's common sense that helps with this. And when people come to me wanting help, I say to them, do you know, I think it's a lot simpler than that. And it usually is. Very, very simple. Now, we know he wrote the 10 Commandments with his finger, didn't he? Yeah. So isn't it interesting to use that terminology where she says, for he is as truly the author of the physical law as he is of the moral law. For he has written his law with his own finger on every nerve, every muscle, every faculty with which we have been entrusted, and every misuse of any part of our organism is a violation of that law. All should become intelligent as the human frame, and how to keep it in the condition necessary to do the work of the Lord. Doesn't God's work suffer because the saints are sick? The saints are sick. They're the ones that have been entrusted with this gift, and they're sick. And the poor pastors, they're just busy fixing the saints. What about out there? The relationship that exists between the physical organism and the spiritual life is one of the most important branches of education. All should become intelligent as to the human frame and how to keep it in the condition necessary to do the work of the Lord. Then the next sentence is the relationship that exists between the human organism and the spiritual life is one of the most important branches of education. So this takes us a step higher. It's not just looking after this physical organism to keep the physical organism working well, but it's affecting the mind. Now, we don't have to go very far into any of these discussions before we see there's an enemy that has sown seeds. Isn't that right? There's a great deceiver out there. Revelation 12, verse 9, that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which has deceived the whole world. Does that mean us? The whole world. And you will find this week, you will find deceptions, not only in our toothpaste and our conditioner, but what we wash our clothes with, the fabrics that we wear, the shoes that we wear, in every area. We know there's much deception in much larger areas. But all the things I just mentioned are affecting our health. Because our skin is millions of little pores, and everything that touches that skin must be pure. That's why God says, and we know this one very well, it's Romans 12, 1 and 2, and I'm sure you know it off by heart. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God. How? By his mercies, that you present your bodies living sacrifices, holy, acceptable to God. Holy, acceptable to God. God is holy. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now that gets us back to give your mind to God and allow him to teach you, because he's the greatest teacher this world has ever known. And the verse I used to quote all the time when I first started this work was Psalm 32 verse 8, where God says, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. So when every day at your health retreat, that's what you start with. Every guest, you say, Father in heaven, you know this person personally. You know how many hairs are on their head. And you know what he said to you? I will instruct thee, and I will teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. I had a lady on the phone one day, and she had a health problem, and we went through everything, went through the laws of health. I could not fault it. And then God impressed me, teeth. Ask her about her teeth. And I said, have you had any trouble with your teeth? Oh, she said, I've got a tooth that's paining me. It's bad, and I can taste the bad coming out of the teeth. Can you see the areas sometimes we need to go? That's why we need the great God of heaven. I said, you've got to go and have that tooth out immediately. I was with my husband and his father when he was still alive, and he took us out for dinner one night at his favourite place, and it was in Maitland, this little town in Australia. And in the foyer of this facility, there were all these photographs of this boxer. I think his name was Darcy or something, and it was about the 40s. And he was famous. He'd won world titles. And of course, he was the golden boy from that town, because he was from that town. And I only saw photos of him young, so I'm intrigued. I'm reading. He died at 34. Overseas, why did he die? Tooth. A bad tooth. Hey, a bad tooth. So if you go to a doctor and you've got pains in your hands, he says it's arthritis, and you'll say, oh, I've got a tooth, look, go to your dentist. Is that right? But as medical missionaries, do you know what we do? We do the whole lot. Isn't that right? We do the whole picture. So something I always ask is, do you have any pain? And you see, that would cover the teeth. We also look at teeth because mercury fillings, they're neurotoxins. Oh, that great deceiver. At it again. Mercury fillings, mercury's a neurotoxin. Root canal fillings. Did you know that root canals are a dead tooth? What does your body try and do to dead things? Evict them. And so often a bad tooth, it's behind, or an abscess, it's usually behind a root canal. So if someone says, I've got an abscess, then I say to them, oh, I'll tell you one recently I just got yesterday. Barbara, I keep getting this pimple on my gum, inside, and I put charcoal poultice, I put this poultice. What poultice should I use? What are we going to do? Why? Why is a pimple coming? There's a reason. So then you go a little bit further. She said, I went to the dentist and he says I should have a root canal filling. Why would the dentist advise a root canal filling? Because the nerve has deteriorated. Why would the nerve deteriorate? Because there's decay in the tooth. Can you see you've got to go back? Got to go way back. You've got to dig, dig, dig. So I wrote back to her and I said, I would like to suggest that there's decay in the tooth, and that's why the nerve deteriorated, which is why the dentist wants to do a root canal, which is why a pimple's coming on the gum inside. Can you see that? And you'll only find that out by digging deeper and deeper and deeper. I went to a health retreat in Queensland when I did my nutrition course about 15 years ago. And I had to do 20 case studies. And I had to do it under another naturopath. So I went up there and I sat with the naturopaths as they interviewed the people. So they do interviews. And then I'd say, I've just got one more question. When did that start? How old were you when that started? Where were you living when that? Write it down. And then he'd ask a few more questions. He's about to ask another question. I'd say, I just have a little question here. Had you had a fall? Why was the knee sore then? See what I'm doing? Digging, digging, digging. Now, a few months later, we had a lady book into our health retreat. And Michael said, what's your reason for booking in? She said, well, I was at the other retreat and I was really impressed with the questions Barbara answered. You see that? With the questions, because you're digging. You want to find out why. Because the curse causeless shall not come. So if this lady didn't have a bad tooth and she had a pimple under there on the gum, if she didn't have a bad tooth, what would I do then? Did you ever bang it? Did you ever hit it? When did it start? Can you see you dig, 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 dig? And sometimes you might not come up with anything, but you know what I find? You usually do. There might be a little indication here or there, and then you dig a little bit deeper. And sometimes you might have to say, do you mind if I ask you it? And sometimes they might say, no, I don't want to answer that question. You know what you say? Okay. See the smile? Okay. And then you move on again. But you know what I find? 9/10 of the time, they come back to you. They come back to you on that. So the two theories in medicine today as to why people get sick, and one of them has turned the world upside down in these last, 2.5 years, and that is the germ theory. Germs cause disease. Where did that theory come from? It came from Louis Pasteur. And looking at Louis Pasteur's history, he was a chemist and he was a socialite. He loved to call all the media to every experiment. He liked the attention, and he came up with a theory that everyone loved. You poor thing. A germ has jumped on you and made you sick. Let's find a drug to kill the germ. Can you see what that does? That takes away all responsibility on the person for what's happening to them, and it's blamed the germ. And isn't that what's happening with COVID? to the point where people have to wear masks to stop the germ. People have to hand sanitize their hands all the time to stop the germ. But it actually defies reason, and I want to show you that. Now, the other theory as to why we get sick is genes. It's in the gene, yeah? So I call them the two Gs, the gene theory or the germ theory. And I'd like to touch on them this evening, and tomorrow morning we're going to explore them a little bit further. And to look at the gene theory, do you know we're going to go first? The CBD? What's the CBD? What's the central business district of the human body? It's the inside workings of the cell. And we are just a bunch of cells. We have 100 trillion cells in our body. And every single cell has a nucleus, and in that nucleus is the DNA. The DNA is the genetic code that determines you and I. The only cell that doesn't have that is the red blood cell. And we'll be exploring the red blood cells a little bit later. But the red blood cell, what does the Bible call it? Leviticus 17:11. This is a very important verse as medical missionaries. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Leviticus 17:11. And I love the patterns in the Bible. And you know what Proverbs 17:22 is. And of course 22 is double 11. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. As you memorise, you'll see these little links, which is very nice. So why, here we are again, why? Why is the blood the life? It carries oxygen, it carries nutrients, it carries water, it carries away waste. We'll be going to that more detail later in the week. And it contains red blood cells. Where does it carry the water, the oxygen and the nutrients to? The CBD. The CBD, the inside workings of the cell. The DNA stretched out looks like this, and I'm sure we've all seen illustrations of this, yeah? You've got 23 chromosomes from your mother, 23 chromosomes from your father. I gave birth to 6 children. I've got 3 boys, 3 girls. My 3 boys will never be 6 foot because look at the height of their mother. I'm only 5'2". They're taller than 5'2". I think they're 5'8", 5'9". And my girls are all taller than me because they got more of the genes from the father, who was nearly 6 foot. He had dark brown curly hair and dark brown eyes. I've got 5 blue-eyed children and 1 brown-eyed child and 1 dark brown hair child. Others are mid. I was blonde when I was younger. And he had curly hair, I have straight hair. I have 3 curly-headed children and 3 straight-haired children. Now we do it with each other. We do it with our nieces, our nephews, our children, our grandchildren. She's got her mother's nose, she's got her father's legs. 23 chromosomes from our father, 23 chromosomes from our mother. Did you know that the Bible talks about the DNA? In Psalm 139? In Psalm 139 verse 14, the Bible says, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Where were we curiously wrought? It's in our mother's womb, yeah? My substance, my being, was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. I gave birth to 6 children, but I didn't know what was going on in there. I didn't know what was going on there. I didn't have scans or anything like that. I'm cautious of all that. And I didn't know till my babies were born what sex they were going to be, anything about them. But my substance wasn't hid from thee when I was curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eye did see my substance, yet being imperfect. In thy book were all my members written, which in continuance were fashioned when as yet there were none of them. In thy book were all my members written. The DNA. Do you know God doesn't have to have a big book? All he has to have in his book is our DNA. Written in there. It's already determined, the colour of my eyes, the colour of my hair, the colour of my skin. It's already determined in his book. In his book were all my members written, whether I have short legs or long legs, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there were yet none of them. It's the best medical book we have, is the Bible. According to the information in this DNA is how we're made. And we have new eye cells every 1 to 2 days. We have new cells that line the gastrointestinal tract every 3 to 5 days. We have a new skin every month. We have a new liver every 6 weeks. We have new bones every 3 months. We're continually being remade according to the pattern, according to the formula. And that DNA is made up of the food we eat. The outside strands is made up of polysaccharides. Polysaccharides simply means many sugars. And everything we eat is made up of many sugars. Outside strand. Crossword bands is made up of amino acids. Amino acids is a breakdown from the protein we eat. And as vegetarians, our protein comes from legumes, nuts and seeds. That's the main protein. And it's all glued together with minerals. So that lovely green leafy salad, all the greens, all your vegetables are high in minerals, but the greens is the highest. Hippocrates, father of medicine, do you know when his time was? 400 years BC. Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. And our very DNA is made up of the food that we are eating. So our new cells are constantly being remade. I'm going to go a little technical here, so bear with me. And please ask me if you want me to repeat something. DNA can be stretched out and called back in, and when it's stretched out it looks like that, but it cannot leave. And so a photocopy is made, and the photocopy is called RNA. And the photocopy goes down to another little section of the cell, which is a little workshop where the new cell is being made. It's called ribosome. Has everyone got an anatomy and physiology book in their home? Every medical missionary should have one. So the notes that you're taking here, when you go home and you look at the inside workings of the cell, you'll find it'll make sense. Whereas maybe before it didn't make a lot of sense. We had a man who'd done medicine do our program, and when he heard these things, he just shook his head. He said, I learnt this in med school, but I never really got it. But you will see it's not hard to get. So RNA comes down with the information into ribosome, the little factory where the new cell is made. Let's make a new gastrointestinal tract cell. Do you remember, students? I'm going to start asking you questions. How long does a gastrointestinal tract cell take to be made? 3 to 5 times. Yep. 3 to 5 days. Every 3 to 5 days. Okay, students, this is a question you don't have to answer. It's just a question I'm putting there. If that's true, how come irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, doesn't heal in, let's be generous and say, 2 weeks? Is that a reasonable question? It's actually a very reasonable question, isn't it? Well, I believe that what I'm about to show you helps to understand why. But first of all, we're going to make a gastrointestinal tract cell, then we're going to make an irritable bowel syndrome cell. RNA comes down, it's the photocopy into ribosome, the new cell is starting to be made. The new cell is built up with amino acids. So let's say the first amino acid is tyrosine. Maybe the next amino acid is phenylalanine. Maybe the next amino acid is methionine. Maybe the next amino acid is lysine. We did tyrosine, lysine. Can you see what's happening here? Now, I'm giving an illustration like a jigsaw to help you understand it, but every amino acid fits into the next amino acid like a jigsaw. And every 3 to 5 days, out pops our new gastrointestinal tract cell. So what happens with irritable bowel syndrome? RNA comes down, the first block goes down, first amino acid, maybe it's methionine. Now we're ready for phenylalanine, and oh no, there's a piece of information missing. Body doesn't quite know what to do. What's supposed to go in there? The information is missing. And there's a rogue cell. And this rogue cell is always wandering around, doesn't fit anywhere, ready to poke its way in. Where'd that rogue cell come from? Environmental poisons, chemicals, genetically modified foods. All of these are causing molecules to be in our body that our body doesn't recognise. And whenever it sees a glitch, in it'll jump. So now comes along, maybe this is lysine. Where does it fit? Where is it going to fit? The usual docking position's not there, so it does the best it can. Okay, now we're ready for, let's say, this one's phenylalanine. Oh no, they're not eating enough protein. And maybe they are eating enough protein, but the gastrointestinal tract is unable to break it down properly. So if you don't break the food down effectively in your gut, it can't get into your blood. And what's the blood? The life of the flesh, the carrier of the nutrients. We're going to spend a whole morning going through the gastrointestinal tract, and I'll show you how that works. Doesn't look very good, does it? And every 3 to 5 days, what pops out? An irritable bowel syndrome cell. Now, we touched on a whole lot of things that might be the causes there, and we'll look at that in more detail when we study the gut. But what I want to quickly touch on now is why is there damage? What causes damage? 92% of DNA damage is caused by a mineral deficiency. So how could we be mineral deficient? People are eating a lot more greens today. 20 years ago, we didn't even know what kale or rocket was. There's a whole lot of greens that we're eating today, much more greens. It is true that if someone just lives on fast food, they're not getting the vegetables or the greens, which is where you get most of your minerals, so they will be deficient. But there's a lot of people eating fruits and vegetables every day and they're mineral deficient. Why? Because the soil's deficient. Yeah. And if the soil's deficient, the plant will be deficient. And if the plant's deficient, the person that eats that plant will be deficient. That's why it's important to feed your soil. Feed your soil so there's food for your plant. And then when you eat that plant, you've got it. Did you know that one organic tomato will give 9 times the iron as one conventionally grown tomato? So that's what you're looking at. The organic might be more expensive, but wow, you've got so much more nutrients in there. But there's more. It's not only that the soil's deficient, so the plant's deficient, so the people that are eating the plants are deficient. There are stimulants that people are taking that are leaching the minerals out. What are the stimulants? The stimulants are caffeine. And I would say that 80% of the guests that come to our retreat drink coffee. So then at the health retreat, you've got to be prepared in the first 24 hours to deal with a lot of headaches. And I'll be showing you in another lecture exactly why they get a headache. Caffeine not only leaches minerals, especially your calcium and your magnesium. And we'll be covering this later in the week, where we'll be looking at bones in detail, which will enable you to make up a program for osteoporosis. And you will find that bones aren't made out of calcium. There's another myth. It's another deception. It's made of 12 main minerals and 64 trace. So the worst thing you can do for bones is take a calcium supplement. Can you see this information is vital for you to know, to be able to give your guess. And when you mention just that quick thing I just did, you've got their ear. Because they're sick of spending a fortune on calcium supplements, and the last test showed they've still got osteoporosis. What have you got to find out when anyone's sick? The history, the symptoms, the response. If there's no response, it's not working. What's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. And when you say that to guests, you've got their ear, because they're sick of doing what they're doing. They've been doing it for 10 years. They've been told they've got to do it, but they're no better. So what we have got is something incredibly valuable. It's God's way of healing. God's way of healing is we were created to heal ourselves. The body was created to heal. It just needs the right condition. And we need to have faith in God and faith in that body. The devil's way of healing is we were evolved. Body can't heal itself. You've got to put some poisons in to make it heal. Can you see the difference? They're very far apart. So what's another stimulant? Oh, by the way, not only does caffeine leach the minerals, caffeine damages the DNA because it disrupts the neurotransmitters in the brain. So you can have a young couple having a cup of coffee each a day, the guy has a can of Coke, the girl has a chocolate. They can give birth to a baby that's prone to attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity and autism, because they were born with a defective DNA because of the parents' caffeine habits. Woo! Now, if you say to someone, you shouldn't drink coffee, it's not good for you, in fact, please don't ever say that. Ever. And you'll lose them if you do. What right have you got to tell me that I can't drink my coffee? But what you can say is, I don't drink coffee. You know why? No, I'm not interested. Okay. So you don't speak. Yeah, why don't you drink coffee? Well, it disrupts the neurotransmitters in the brain, and if you keep doing it, that can actually damage your DNA towards your neurotransmitters. You can give birth to a baby that's prone to attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity. Do you think they'll be interested then? Can you see how you're giving them the why? Now, I've probably touched on a whole lot of things that you haven't been able to write everything down, but we're going to explore a lot of these subjects in more detail. So caffeine not only leaches minerals, it can also damage the DNA. Refined sugar, nothing wrong with the sugarcane plant. It's the pure crystallized acid that's extracted out of the sugarcane plant. That's the problem. It goes into the body naked and it leaves the body better dressed with your minerals. In fact, one writer said it this way, and I think it's a good way to say it. Sugar leaves your body better dressed than when it went in. What's it dressed with now? Well, it's taken out of your wardrobe. It's taken some of the minerals out of your wardrobe. So when it takes the minerals out of your wardrobe, what's happening to your teeth and your bones? They're becoming deficient. Sugar not only leaches the minerals, sugar also damages the DNA. How? Causes blood sugar levels to rise dramatically and then drop dramatically, and then when the person goes down they have another lolly and then it goes up again, and this constant whiplash wears out the pancreas to the point that a couple can give birth to a baby with a defective DNA to their pancreas because of their sugar habits. Can you see that our lifestyle affects the DNA we give to our children? At this point, if you've got guests who are feeling very guilty and very sad right now, and you can tell when you're lecturing some sad faces or young mothers going, oh no. At this point I say, there's a lovely verse in the Bible, it's in Acts 30 verse 17 that says, God winks at our ignorance. You did not know. So you can't take blame for something you did not know. But we live in an amazing body with an inbuilt ability to heal itself. And if you begin implementing what you hear here, your children will get stronger. Can you see how you come with that? I even had one lady starting to cry after the lecture. Oh, what I've done to my children. So then you must go straight away and counsel and say, you didn't know. It's not your fault. It's that rotten sugar company, that chocolate company. They're not interested in you. They're only interested in your money. But you know, it's worse than that. There's a great deceiver behind there who wants to destroy you. We all know what 1 Peter 5 verse 8 says. Know ye not that your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeing whom he can devour. That's what he wants. He wants our destruction. Now you can't share that with every guest. The atheist isn't too excited when you share that with them. Discretion is needed. That's why God says, I will instruct thee. Teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. He said, I will guide thee with mine eye. Another stimulant is alcohol. I often say this, I read this from the Australian Health Department 10 years ago, there's no safe dose of alcohol. Alcohol's a neurotoxin. Children being born today with fetal alcohol syndrome from parents that have 2 drinks a week. You familiar with Dr. Neil Nedley? Yeah. In his book Proof Positive? Fantastic resource is that book for us medical missionaries. And I got that information out of that book. So excellent resource is that book. Now I also know that people get, and you might have experienced this, I was at ASI in Florida one year, you know, thousands of people there. And so I always go to the health lectures. You probably know I'm interested in health, so I went to the health lectures. And there'd be Dr. Such and Such, and he's got a PowerPoint there, and he comes up with the first graph, that's interesting. Second graph, third graph, fourth graph, fifth graph, and you're just getting sick of graphs. Now, I don't think that it means you don't use graphs, and you might be savvy to do a PowerPoint, and PowerPoints can be excellent, especially when you're starting, because it's a prompt for you, and it also helps, you know, attract your students to what's happening. And I certainly think a graph or 2 doesn't hurt, but beware of over-graphing people. You will lose them. And I'm interested in health, and I'm starting to fall asleep within 20 minutes. And I had a young woman come to me at ASI, and she said, Barbara, I want to tell you something. She said, I used to do the PowerPoints and all the graphs, and I did notice people started falling asleep. So she said, now I use the whiteboard. She said, I use the whiteboard now. Because you can see what you can do from a whiteboard. You lead the people on. The people are interested. What's coming next? What's coming next? But it doesn't mean you don't have PowerPoint. You know, you can get some very nice PowerPoints. Alcohol leaches the minerals. Alcohol damages the DNA. There is no doubt about that. Tobacco. Children are being born today with more alveoli damaged. And the honeycomb shape around the alveoli has holes in it. And overall, less alveoli. Alveoli, those little, and I'll be drawing them a little bit more detail, especially when we go into the respiratory. You've got, I think it's 300 million alveoli in your lungs, and that's where the gas exchange takes place. So children born to smoking parents, that's happening. One girl said to me, Barbara, I stopped smoking when I fell pregnant. And I said, well done. But unfortunately, there's already been some damage done. You see, it's the DNA that comes through. But you have to congratulate her for not doing it through pregnancy. Because did you know that every cigarette smoked, at that split second, that baby's deprived of oxygen? That's why they often find that babies born to smoking mothers, they're not as big. So these are the stimulants that leach the minerals out and also damage the DNA. We're looking at what causes damage to the DNA. Genetically modified foods. Unfortunately, I know in Australia and America, Monsanto is so big, he wins every court case where we're trying to get GMA put on the package. Have you noticed it's not there? Because they win every court case. So how do you know if something's genetically modified, organic? Because an organic farmer loses his organic status if he uses genetically modified foods. So grow as much as you can. We always get non-hybrid seed. I'm the gardener at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, and before I left I was busily getting that garden ready for going away, and the winter's coming so the weeds don't grow as much. We don't get snow but we get frost. And I don't know if you're familiar with Mizuma. Mizuma is a Japanese green and it's purple and it's sort of feathery and it's got a tiny bite to it. It's just lovely through your salad. I don't know, Casper, if we had it when you were there, but we've always seemed to have Mizuma in the garden. Because my son, when he was gardener about 5 years ago, he planted a whole bed of it. In fact, we were selling as much as we could buy of other foods. Isn't it great when you can do that? Well, the Mizuma must have gone to seed last year because we dug over about 4 big beds and must have been 3 or 4 days later, it's just a carpet of Mizuma. Yes, I had to hoe it back in the ground because we do want to eat more than Mizuma. So you can Google Mizuma, have a look at it. I think you can get purple Mizuma and it's just like a green, but it's got a little bit of a pepper in it.
Yeah. How do you spell it?
Mizuma, I think it's Mizuma, I think it's just that.
Yeah.
Mizuma.
Is it a grass or a...
It's a green. It's a green leafy vegetable.
All right.
But it's not very green, it's purple. But those dark greens and those purples, they're great sources of iron. So have organic as much as possible. Genetically modified foods is when the DNA of 2 species is spliced together to produce something that they want. Do you know what that means? It can splice into your DNA. And mutation of DNA basically is a contributing factor to cancer. Chemicals. We're going to go into areas with chemicals that you never ever probably thought about. Be careful of the clothes that touch your skin. Let me give you the name of 3 chemical fabrics. Polyester, acrylic and nylon. They're chemical fabrics. But I've got some good news. I've borrowed this little top because the airlines have lost my bags. And I was so excited to read the label. It's cotton and modal. Modal is the cellulose spun from the birch tree. Rayon is from wood pulp and so is viscose. So be very careful on what's touching your skin. Yes?
So any of these fabrics lose, like polyester, does it lose its toxicity after being washed?
Does polyester or acrylic or nylon lose its toxicity? No.
After many years?
No. It's still polyester. And you know what they're finding today? It does not break down in the soil. So they've got a huge problem today of these fabrics not breaking down in the soil. When I go into a shop, the first thing I do is I read the label. I read the label. Especially ladies, underwear can often be made out of these acrylic. Remember, there's a great deceiver out there who wants to destroy you and wants to poison you. Especially when you're exercising and your pores open and those fabrics get hot, and then you really start absorbing the chemicals. So be careful what you wash your clothes in, your body, what you clean your teeth, what you put on your skin. In 1 Corinthians 3:16 and 17, I'm sure we all know it. Know you not that ye are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. If any man defile. Now, if you've been wearing these fabrics, remember Acts 30 verse 17, that God winks at our ignorance. You did not know. Remember that great deceiver that's deceived the whole world? But the biggest chemical company in the world is the pharmaceutical company. Did you know that if a drug doesn't have a side effect, it's not a drug? I think that was Illa Lilly that said that, who is one of the heads of the pharmaceutical companies. If it doesn't have a side effect, it's not a drug. Did you know that the pharmaceutical company are making billions out of the COVID vaccine? Mm-hmm. We had a guest come to our retreat in Manchester last week, and she was on antidepressants. She's been on them for 20 years, so that's something she can't just stop. Now, she was stopping her 3 bottles of wine a day that she'd been drinking for 4 years, and before that she'd been drinking a bottle of half of brandy a day. Isn't it incredible what the human body copes with? She's a very large lady, and the first day she could hardly walk 4 steps without heaving. On the last day she was walking. Just exciting. It's the best work, the health retreat work. And she said to us, she said, I didn't mean to, but I forgot my antidepressants. I forgot to take them for 2 days. And she said, my mind's clearer. But she said, I know you can't just stop them, so I took it on the 3rd day. And then she said, I forgot for the next 2 days, so I took it on the 3rd day. So, you know what, we're also looking for? Response. Now, her body's coping with that, so you know what I said to her? Keep it up. And maybe in 2 weeks, just take it every 4th day. And maybe after another 2 weeks, every 5th day. Can you see that? I always say to guests, I have no authority over your medication. Only you and your doctor do. But this is what I would do. But it's your choice, and whatever you choose to do, I will respect that. That's very, very important. So you're also looking at response. She was just going from better to better. But it's quite possible if she stopped them completely, she might crash in a week. Because she's been on them for so long. But she was doing well. It's not hard, and I think it's important as medical missionaries, that if anyone comes to you on medication, you Google their medication and you write down the side effects. Anyone can do that. You write down the main side effects. And one lady in the retreat in Alabama last year, she's 45, she said, Barbara, I've got stage 4 kidney disease. I said, oh, are you on any medication? She said, I've been on this blood pressure medication for 6 years. And we Googled it, and guess what the side effect was? Kidney disease. So we printed it out and we showed her. She said, what? Do you know, you will gain much confidence by showing them that. And then you know what they say to you, what can I do? And then you can say, I'm so glad you asked. Because we've got the hawthorn berry. Now we're going to go into heart in detail, and you will be able to make the program that I gave this woman on how you can strengthen that heart. Psalm 104 verse 14. This is a psalm it's important for you to memorise. God gave herbs for the service of man. And a lady just emailed me and she said, Barbara, I tried to stop my blood pressure medication and my blood pressure went through the roof. She said, I'm on Hawthornberry now. She said, I'm just worried that the same thing might happen or I might go too low. I said, not with the herbs, because herbs are there for your service. If your blood pressure's too low, it'll bring it up. If it's too high, it'll bring it down. No drug can do that. Monosodium glutamate is a toxic poison.
What is it?
Monosodium glutamate, it's like a flavour enhancer. In fact, this is one name they give it now, natural flavour enhancer. That almost sounds healthy, doesn't it? What are we looking at here? We're looking at things that damage the DNA, which explains why many people aren't healing today. How can you heal the DNA? Make sure you're getting lots of polysaccharides, lots of minerals, lots of amino acids. And we'll be looking at that in detail when we look at food. Mold. Mold can splice into the DNA of trees, reproduce itself. Can it do that to humans? I'm just going to very lightly touch on a principle now, which I'm going to explore in great detail tomorrow morning, because I think you've done very well to be awake for so long. And this is a very important principle, and this principle blows COVID making us sick. It just blows that theory right out. Microorganism. Mold is a microorganism, and there are many different microorganisms. Microorganisms are everywhere. There's microorganisms in the air, everywhere. We're breathing them in and out constantly. And there are 10 times more microorganisms in the body than cells. How many cells in the body? 100 trillion. So there are 10 times, I haven't done that maths, 10 times more microorganisms than cells, and there are 10 times more microorganisms in our gastrointestinal tract than anywhere else in the body. And we'll look at that in detail when we go through the gut. And they're there. God put them there. They're an important part of living, running organism, but whenever cell damage happens, these microorganisms have the ability to change roles. They now become the cleanup team or the garbage collectors. I call them the garbage collectors because we had a microbiologist do our program and he said that's what we call them as microbiologists. And their name is bacteria. So where are you going to find a lot of bacteria? You're going to find a lot of bacteria wherever there's waste and damage. As the environment changes, as the bacteria is doing its work, the environment changes. It now becomes the exterminators, and we know exterminators exterminate things. And the exterminator's name, this is the next stage of breakdown, is called yeast, fungus. And the yeast, the properties of the yeast and fungus are identical to another microorganism, and that is a virus. A virus needs a host. Fungus needs a host. Yeast needs a host. That's why the coronavirus won't survive there very long, because it hasn't got a host. The coronavirus is 1 micron. The holes in the masks are 5 microns. See, that's a good bit of information to have for people. In other words, the masks are totally useless. As the environment changes, so do the microbes. Now they become the undertakers. And undertakers take away dead things. And the undertaker's name is mould. And that's the last stage of breakdown in the cycle of life. So matter is brought back to dust through the action of these microorganisms. Genesis 3:19 says we come from dust, we go back to dust, we're dust. And there's that lovely verse in Psalm 103, he knows our frame, he remembers that we are dust. Because that's what we're brought back to, dust. What brings us back to dust, students? The cycle of life. The cycle of life. And a basic law of science states, this is important to get this one, nothing's created, nothing's destroyed. It just changes form. It just changes form. And isn't that why we have compost bins? I'm sure you have compost bins here, is that right? Here is the plant, here are its roots. And when I put compost into my soil, and I always put compost into my soil after one crop, because a tomato plant will take nutrients out of the soil. And so before you put another crop, and I usually alternate tops and bottoms, so carrots and tomatoes, alternate your roots and your tops because different things are taken out. But before another crop goes in, you've got to feed that soil. And the best feed is compost, and I'll show you why. So when I put compost into the soil, I'm putting in microorganisms. Because once these microorganisms here have brought the matter back to dust, remember they're changing roles. We change roles all through life. You probably noticed when I arrived here, I was dressed for the middle of winter. And I had to quickly change. Why did I change? Because it's warm here. We change roles according to the environment. I'm not dressed now the way I'm dressed when I'm digging in the garden, when I'm swimming in the lake. I'm not dressed now the way I'll be dressed for my daughter's wedding next year. We change roles according to the environment. So do the microbes. So do the microbes. They change roles according to the environment. Now, if it suddenly drops to 11 degrees tomorrow, I might put my winter woolies back on. We change roles according to the environment. So do the microbes. So once they've brought matter back to dust, they're waiting in the dust for their next job. So with my compost bin, we're putting scraps from the kitchen, we're putting weeds from the garden, and I like to alternate the heavy scraps from the kitchen with the stalks from the old corn plants, with the stalks from the broccoli plants, and that aerates it a bit. And maybe the farmer down the road who doesn't give any chemicals to his cows will collect cow manure and put some of that in the compost. And these microorganisms are going to bring everything back to dust. You look at the apple tree. See the flower? How does the flower grow? Under the action of microorganisms. And then out of the flower comes an apple, under the action of the same microorganisms. But the apple's not ready to eat. It must ripen. How does it ripen? Under the action of the same microorganisms. They change roles according to the environment. But no one eats the apple, so what happens to it? It rots. Is that right?
Yeah.
It rots under the action of the same microorganisms. They just change roles according to the environment. Louis Pasteur said, it's only ever a bacteria and it only ever will be. It only ever is a fungus or it only ever will be. It's called monomorphism. Monomorphism means one form. But Antoine Beauchamp, 6 times professor, a contemporary at the time of Louis Pasteur, he presented pleomorphism. I have just presented for you pleomorphism, many forms. And that's why my compost bin works, because of pleomorphism, yeah?
Is it an epigenetic change that is taking place, or how do you explain that change into polymorphism?
Well, it's just the cycle of life. It's the cycle of life. The word epigenetics is interesting, which is the effect of lifestyle on our genes. But this is different. It's the cycle of life. See, let me give you an illustration in Australia. A cat dies in the bush. And what happens is the kookaburra has a nibble, the dingo has a nibble, the dung beetles come up, take a bit, the blowfly lays its maggots, they do a bit of a clean up to bring cat back to dust. What Antoine Beauchamp did, he put a dead cat in an airtight container. No dingo, no kookaburra, no blowflies, no maggots, dung beetles. After 4 months he opened it and it was dust. What had brought that cat back to dust? It was the microorganisms that are an integral part of living, running cat. Upon death of the organism, that's the ultimate cell damage, they take off their suit of clothes, so to speak, put their rubber gloves and apron on and start the work. They're the garbage collectors. They're just opportunist organisms. They're just going to be active where there's something to clean up. As the environment changes, they change till eventually they have done what God designed them to do, which is bring matter back to dust. What does the preacher say at the funeral? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's the cycle of life. With great excitement, Antoine Beauchamp took the dust from the dead cat and put it under a microscope. It was alive with microorganisms. Remember, nothing's created, nothing's destroyed. And that's why I put compost in my garden. Because the microorganisms that were part of developing the carrot, it's not all eaten, it gets put in the compost bin, then those same microorganisms bring it back to earth, and then I put that earth into my garden. Now they play another role. Now those microorganisms are responsible for the breakdown of the minerals in the soil. They are also responsible for the absorption of the minerals out of the soil and into the plant. They protect the plant against harmful pathogens. And they nourish the plant. That plant knows that it needs those microorganisms, so 50% of the fuel that the plant makes from photosynthesis, it sends back down to the roots to feed the microbes. And you would have read where Ellen White says the law of service is written on every plant. Every plant grows for one purpose, to create apples for you and me, to create rocket for you and me. The law of service. Because that plant knows it needs those microbes for this. That's why organically grown fruits and vegetables has a far higher nutrient content, because of the microbes in the soil. I have 3 compost bins. One I'm adding to, one sitting, waiting for the cycle of life to bring it right back to dirt, and one I'm taking from. And I know this one's ready to take from because pumpkin plants are coming out. Poor plants are coming out. They're the best pumpkins too, aren't they? So what I did last year, I just kept throwing the pumpkin vine over the back of the compost bin and let it run all the way down the back. Oh, when I was picking pumpkins, Jap pumpkins this big from that pumpkin plant. They said, we dig it out. I said, just wait. The frosts aren't here yet. This pumpkin let it get a little bit bigger. And it was being well fed because its roots were in the compost. And why is the compost so rich? Because of these microorganisms. Now the last thing I'm going to show you, and I'm going to touch on this again tomorrow, because for most people this is very new. I trained as a psychiatric nurse. Germs cause disease. That's what we were taught. And if anyone was sick, we've got to give them a drug to heal them. And they've got an infection, they must have an antibiotic. No. Why? Why is it there? They're only going to hang around where they're getting well fed. So if you give a body an environment that is strong, clean, healthy, well nourished, there's nothing for these guys to do. Now I'm going to take this one more place before we finish tonight. We have roots. Did you know that we have roots? Very similar to the roots of the plant. Lining our gastrointestinal tract are villi. And when we were born, we were literally flooded with our mother's microorganisms, because in utero our gut is sterile. So when we're born, our first breath, because remember babies are born down there where a lot of those microorganisms are coming out of, the baby's breathing and swallowing in microorganisms, and the first substance that comes out of a woman's breast is colostrum. The milk doesn't come in for 3 days. There's a thick yellow substance that comes out in those first 3 days. It's colostrum, and it's incredibly rich in microorganisms. And what those microorganisms do is they form a thick turf wall around the gut. We'll look at this in more detail when we look at the gut. Those microorganisms do the same thing that they do in the soil. They are responsible for the final breakdown of our food, especially releasing B vitamins. They are responsible for the absorption of the food out of the gut and into the life of the flesh. What's that?
Blood.
The blood. So not only are they responsible for the final breakdown, but they also are responsible for getting the food out of the gut and into the blood. These microorganisms protect the blood against any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut. These microorganisms nourish the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. What an amazing process. You're starting to see that they're not our enemy. This isn't our enemy. This isn't our enemy. This isn't our enemy. Neither this nor this. If they're out of control, we've got to put the detective hat on and find out why. If your garbage bin is smelling, you don't put a white cloth over it, a vase of flowers, and spray sweet-smelling perfumes around it, do you? No, you open it, you empty it a long way from the house, you clean it out, put it back in the kitchen, no need for white cloths, vases of flowers, or sweet-smelling perfumes anymore. Why? Why is my garbage bin so smelly? Why? Because remember, the curse causeless shall not come. So my aim this evening was just to begin looking at the true cause of disease, because that is what the medical missionary institutions are about, is teaching the true cause of disease. And to be able to teach the true cause of disease, we need to look very clearly at medicine's claim for the cause of disease, which is germs or genes. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Very much so. So I have given you enough for your little grey cells to contemplate. And every day we'll be building a little bit more. And I touched on a few things that may have puzzled you in your mind, but I can just about promise you that we will be exploring all of those aspects in these 10 days. And if in the early morning or while you're going off to sleep a question comes, please write it down. Write down your questions. I received a lot of questions, and I really think that as we go through this, you'll find that they will be answered. And if they're not, we can certainly address them. Because our aim is to give you a crash course on being your own doctor this week. Yes?
You talked about a lot of different negative stimulants. What about refined salt?
Yes, we'll be pursuing refined salt this week and looking at why it is so bad. But basically, very quickly, seawater has 92 minerals and refined salt has 2. So immediately we've got a problem. Immediately we've got a problem. Yes?
We've touched upon bacteria and virus here. Are we going to go also in depth when it comes to infections and understand infection, how they work?
Yep. Because there is a reason. When I was a little girl and I got bronchitis, I would be taken to the doctor and given antibiotics, and that's the first thing we're going to look at tomorrow morning. And then when I became a nurse and I didn't live a very good lifestyle, I didn't become a Christian until I was 25, and I'd get a cold, I'd start coughing up yellow, I'd think I've got an infection. That's what we were taught. You have to go to the doctor and get an antibiotic. But tomorrow, one of the first things we're going to look at is what is an antibiotic? Where did it come from? And its role on the planet. And did God make antibiotics? So thank you for your attention tonight.